Welcome, sleepless spirit. I'm your storyteller tonight, here to guide you gently into the shadows of slumber, where dreams take over and worries fade away. Before we begin, don't forget to like this video and subscribe for more bedtime tales, whispered just for you. Let me know in the comments, where in the world are you watching from, and what time is it as you listen tonight? And if there's a story you've been longing to hear, something spooky, something comforting, tell me. I'm always listening. Now, tuck yourself in. Let the darkness wrap around you like a warm blanket. It's time to let go and drift into the story. Tonight, I am your host, and every night after 3 o'clock, we will ride shotgun with America's truckers into their worst nightmares. On America's most remote routes, 5 million truck drivers see things that the rest of us never see. They come across people we pray for, we never meet, and some of them never reach home. What you're about to see are 11 real stories, confirmed by police reports, news articles, and first-hand accounts of the most unsettling experiences long-haul truckers have ever reported. These aren't spooky tales or urban legends told around campfires. They are actual incidents. That what makes Verified Fears unique, that every nightmare you hear on this channel actually occurred before we set out on our journey into the dark. And some of the perpetrators are still at large. The stories I'm about to share have been cross-referenced with official documentation, police records, and multiple sources of confirmation. Click the like button to help other horror fans find these verified accounts of actual terror. And if you're a truck driver who has had a harrowing experience, leave a comment below. Verified Fears uploads the most spine-tingling true stories every week, and I promise you won't want to miss what they have in store for you. These 11 accounts will put you inside the cab with drivers who faced their worst fears on desolate stretches of asphalt where help was hundreds of miles away. Each story is investigated for possible future episodes, so get ready, because once we start this journey down America's darkest highways, there's no turning back. This is Verified Fears, where the first story starts now, and I must warn you that it will make you reevaluate everything you believe you know about the highways you travel. This account is from veteran trucker Danny Rodriguez, who has been driving cross-country for more than 15 years without experiencing any serious incidents. Danny was well known among his fellow drivers as someone who didn't get scared easily, someone who had seen it all, and someone who could handle anything that came his way. Danny was transporting electronics from California to Chicago on Interstate 80 through Wyoming on a chilly February night in 2019 with cool professionalism. He was running about 2 hours behind schedule because of weather delays, and it was just after midnight when he reached that particularly barren stretch between Laram and Cheyenne. You know, if you've driven it, where the wind howls across empty plains and your headlights seem to engulfed by the darkness. The temperature had dropped to -5 degrees, and there was enough snow to make the road dangerous that Danny had to reduce his speed to about 50 miles per hour. It was at this point that he noticed the convoy of 3 trucks running in perfect formation behind him, about 4 miles back. At first, Danny didn't give it much thought because truckers frequently travel together for safety, particularly in inclement weather, but as the miles went by, something felt strange. The trucks kept the same distance regardless of how Danny changed his speed. When he slowed down on a steep grade, they slowed down. When he sped up on a straight stretch, they matched his pace precisely. It was as if they were attached to him by an unseen rope. Danny attempted to reach out on his CB. He tried again on Channel 19, the unofficial trucker frequency, hoping to talk to the 3 trucks running behind me going east at mile marker to 135. But there was nothing, not even the normal conversation you'd expect to hear from other drivers in the area. He radio cycled through the standard channels, saying, "Hey convoy behind me, you guys copy nothing but static." As Danny crested a hill with the 240-meter marker, he first noticed the trucks in his mirrors. All 3 were older models, as he could tell by the shape of their cabs and the headlight configuration. They looked like trucks from the 1980s or 90s, the kind you don't see much on the road anymore. There were also occasional bursts of static that, if you listen closely, almost sounded like whispered voices. His sense of unease increased when he realized that he hadn't seen any other traffic on a major interstate like I-80 for more than an hour. Even in the middle of the night, you'd expect to see at least a few cars or other vehicles. But what struck him as strange was that none of them had their running lights on despite the freezing weather and blowing snow. Instead, headlights were shining through the darkness like 6 glowing eyes. Danny chose to test his followers by pulling into a rest area at mile marker 250, thinking the trucks would either stop as well or continue past him. Instead, they slowed down and parked in a line at the far end of the rest area. The highway was completely deserted except for Danny and his enigmatic escort. It was as though they were traveling through a world where everyone else had simply disappeared. Even though the rest area was a major stop on a heavily traveled interstate, it felt strange because it was completely empty. The parking lot lights were on, but they cast strange shadows, and the engines were running. Headlights were still on, and Danny could see the silhouettes of drivers in each cab, but they were just sitting there watching him. Danny decided he didn't want to find out what his followers wanted, so he got back into his cab and headed toward the darkened building that housed the restrooms and vending machines. When he got there, he saw a handwritten sign taped to the door that simply read, "Closed until further notice." The handwriting was shaky. As he exited the rest area, he looked in his mirrors and merged back onto the highway. 3 trucks immediately followed, reverting to their ideal formation, exactly a quarter of a mile behind him. This continued for another 50 meters through small towns that should have had some life, but instead looked completely deserted. It was approximately 3 in the morning, when his engine began to sputter as he approached a lengthy uphill grade. The temperature gauge started to rise toward the red zone, and he could smell burning coolant. Things took a turn that still gives Danny nightmares. Any trucker will tell you that losing your engine in the middle of nowhere in sub-zero weather isn't just an inconvenience, it can be a death sentence. Nevertheless, Danny was able to steer his truck to the top of the grade before it died. His hazard lights flashed as he completely rolled to a stop on the shoulder. The 3 trucks that had been following him didn't stop or even slow down. Instead, they continued to drive past him at normal highway speed. As each truck passed, Danny got his first good look at the drivers, and what he saw defied explanation. Each cab seemed empty, with no driver visible behind the wheel and no movement inside. The trucks themselves were being propelled by something Danny couldn't see, but as the 3rd truck went by, Danny saw something that made his blood run cold. A company name painted in faded letters on the back of the trailer was Westbound Freight Company. Danny recognized that name because he had read about it in trucking magazines. In the 1980s, Westbound Freight was a small trucking company based in Wyoming that had closed after 3 of Danny sat in his dead truck, watching the taillights of the 3 westbound freight trucks vanish into the darkness ahead. The temperature inside his cab was already dropping, and he knew he had maybe an hour before hypothermia became a serious concern. He tried his cell phone, but there was no signal, so he tried his CB radio again, and their drivers vanished during a blizzard in 1987. Their trucks were found abandoned on Interstate 80 with no evidence of what had happened to the men. The voices were talking about road conditions and truck stops that had changed decades ago. They mentioned a truck stop in Cheyenne that had been demolished in the early 2000s as if it was still open, and they talked about avoiding it. This time, he heard something that made his skin crawl a little bit through the static. 3 men were talking about the weather, road conditions, and their delivery schedule. One of the voices said, "We have a driver who broke down at mile marker 285. Should we go back and help him?" Another voice said, "No, let him freeze. We have a schedule to keep." A third voice laughed. and Danny knew that the construction zone had been finished 15 years prior. Like wind howling through a cemetery, and said, "He'll be joining us soon enough anyway." Danny became increasingly horrified when he realized that they were discussing him, and that these phantom drivers somehow knew exactly where he was and what was going on with him. As if in response to his thoughts, the radio crackled once more, and one of the "We've been driving these roads for 37 years, and the winter nights don't bother us anymore." At that point, Danny noticed headlights approaching from behind, not the steady beams of normal headlights, but flickering, wavering lights that seemed to dance in the darkness. Voices said directly to him, "Don't worry, Danny, the cold isn't so bad once you get used to it." 3 trucks were approaching. Even though their engines were running, the lead truck stopped right behind Danny's trailer, and he heard footsteps crunching through the snow toward his cab. As they approached, Danny noticed that the trucks themselves looked strange. Their paint was faded and rusted, their chrome was tarnished, and ice crystals covered their windshields. He had been driving in reverse down the interstate at highway speed. He couldn't see anyone walking in his mirrors, but when he heard 3 slow, deliberate knocks at his driver's side door, someone said, "Engine trouble, buddy, we can give you a ride." The voice sounded friendly enough, but there was something off about it that made Danny think of frozen vocal cords and blue lips. With 15 years of trucking experience, Danny's instincts told him not to open the door, and he sat motionless, barely breathing, hoping that whoever or whatever was outside would give up and leave. We know these roads very well, having driven them longer than most people have been alive. The knocking came again, more insistent this time, and the voice called, "Come on, Danny, don't be rude. We know you're in there, and we know you're getting mighty cold. Open up, and we'll get you warmed up real nice." Danny started to shiver uncontrollably as the temperature in his taxi continued to drop, and he could see that his enigmatic visitors were correct. He wouldn't be able to withstand the cold for much longer. However, something told him that accepting their assistance would be far worse than freezing to death. That's when Danny heard another engine coming from the east, and as a Wyoming state trooper pulled up behind the phantom convoy, he watched in his mirrors as the patrol car's emergency lights started to flash, illuminating the 3 trucks that had been following. Although the trucks were still the same older models, Danny could see that they had changed in the red and blue strobing light. They now appeared as though they belonged in a museum. The paint was completely faded, the tires were flat and cracked, and the frost covered every surface. Most unsettling of all, he could see through the cab windows to the seats beyond that. The trucks were undoubtedly empty. The trooper's public address system spoke. "This is Wyoming State Police. Are you okay in there?" The driver of the disabled vehicle said, "I'm okay, officer." He had never been happier to hear a human voice in his life, so he grabbed his CB radio and replied. The trooper spent the next 2 hours assisting Danny in getting his truck running again. It was a straightforward fix involving a loose coolant hose that shouldn't have caused the complete engine failure Danny had experienced. As they worked, Danny told the officer about the 3 trucks that had been following him, and the trooper listened. There are 3 trucks here. That Danny looked in his mirrors again, but they were gone completely, as if they had never been there. The officer remained silent until Danny had completed his story, at which point he said something that bothers Danny to this day. "You're not the first driver to report seeing westbound freight trucks on this section of highway. We receive maybe 3 or 4 reports a year, all of which involve drivers breaking down around mile marker 285 during winter storms. The odd thing is that we looked into the initial disappearance of those. The cabs were frozen solid inside, as if they had been sitting empty in the cold 4 days. In 1987, westbound drivers discovered their trucks in this exact location, with the heaters running and the engines running. Danny managed to get his truck running and finished his delivery to Chicago without any more problems. But he has never driven that section of I-80 through Wyoming again, especially not during the winter. The most unsettling aspect of this story isn't just Dee's experience. The Wyoming State Police confirmed they have files on 17 similar encounters over the past 32 years. 17 drivers who broke down at mile. He changed to a southern route, which adds 2 days to his cross-country runs. But Danny argues that 2 extra days of driving is a small price to pay. The police won't formally comment on the disappearances, but Officer Mitchell Thompson, who assisted Danny that night, said that he was approached by the phantom westbound freight convoy of those 17 drivers. 3 of them were never seen again, and their trucks were discovered in the same condition as the original westbound vehicles, with heaters running on the engines and cabs frozen solid. In an interview with the local newspaper, after he retired from the force 6 months later, he said something that adds a final chill to this story. Some roads retain their ghosts, and some ghosts aren't content to just haunt. They're constantly looking for drivers to join their convoy. Let's move on to our second story, which demonstrates that sometimes the most story comes from Lisa Patterson, a long-haul truck driver who had been driving for 8 years and took great pride in knowing every major road in the nation like the back of her hand. Lisa was the type of driver who could navigate from Seattle to Miami without ever using a GPS, instead relying on her extensive knowledge of interstates, truck stops, and shortcuts that most drivers never use. Terrifying encounters start with the smallest mistakes. Lisa was hauling furniture from North Carolina to Texas on a humid August night in 2021, following her usual route along Interstate 40. She was feeling good about making an early delivery and was ahead of schedule when she encountered unexpected construction near the Tennessee-Arkansas border. The highway was completely closed due to an overturned chemical truck, and the detour signs led traffic onto a number of back roads that would eventually connect to Highway 67 South. Lisa had already driven this detour perhaps 2 years prior, so she wasn't too worried. The route added roughly 40 miles to her journey, but it would get her around the construction and back on course. However, she was unaware that rural development and road construction had drastically altered the area since her last visit, with new roads being constructed, old ones being abandoned, and detour signs. By the time Lisa realized she was lost, she had been driving on increasingly narrow country roads for more than an hour. Her GPS had lost signal about 20 minutes earlier, and her CB radio was only picking up static. The roads she was traveling on weren't even marked on her trucking atlas, and every turn seemed to lead to another unmarked intersection with no signs. The roads she was following were actually leftovers from a previous construction project that should have been removed months earlier. There were signs pointing the way back to civilization, but nothing about the surrounding landscape seemed quite right to Lisa. The trees on either side of the road were so dense and overgrown that they created a tunnel effect that blocked out most of the moonlight. What little she could see in her headlights seemed off in some way, including farmhouses that looked abandoned with broken windows and overgrown yards, but with new tires. Lisa's first reaction was to turn around and head back to the interstate, but the roads she was taking were too narrow for a semi-truck to make a U-turn. She would need to find a wide spot or an intersection big enough to maneuver her rig around. There were tracks in their driveways and fields that should have been full of crops in late summer, but were instead covered in dead vegetation that appeared to have been burned or poisoned. Lisa was looking for a place to turn around when she noticed that she kept passing the same landmarks: a red barn with half of its roof missing, a dead tree with twisted branches, and a rusted mailbox shaped like a cow. At first, Lisa thought she was just confused, and that the rural landscape was making similar-looking features appear identical. But after passing the cow-shaped mailbox 4 times, she realized something was seriously wrong. She had been driving for 2 hours since leaving the interstate, but according to her odometer, she was following a circle on roads that should have led her in a straight line. Lisa chose to stop at the next house that had any signs of life and asked for directions because she had always been self-sufficient and took pride in never needing assistance while driving. But getting home safely was more important than her ego. When she arrived, she saw a small white farmhouse with a porch light on, and what looked to be a television flickering through the front window. Lisa pulled into the gravel driveway and approached the front door. When she knocked, the television sound instantly stopped, but no one answered. Lisa could see that the lights were on inside, and she was positive she had captured movement through the window as she got closer. Timon yelled, "Pardon me, I'm a truck driver, and I'm lost. Could you help me with directions?" There was still no answer, but as Lisa turned to go, she heard what sounded like whispering coming from inside the house. She saw children's toys strewn all over the front yard, which made her blood run cold. Tricycle, a few dolls, and a sandbox full of sand, but the toys were covered in a thick layer of dust and dirt, as though they had been left outside 4 years. The sandbox was full of dead insects, and what appeared to be small animal bones in addition to sand. Lisa quickly returned to her truck and drove on, but each house she passed had the same pattern lights on indications of recent activity. But when she knocked on the door, no one answered, and they all had kids' toys in the yard that appeared to have been left 4 years, but were arranged as though kids had just finished playing with them. Lisa kept checking her mirrors, but there was never any traffic behind her, and she couldn't get rid of the feeling that she was being watched. She believed she saw movement in the tree-lined shapes that were too big to be animals, but moved in ways that didn't seem quite human. Lisa believed she was being followed, and that something was pacing her truck from just outside of her headlights multiple times. It was around 2 a.m. when she saw the first person she had seen since leaving the interstate, a woman standing in the middle of the road, lit by Lisa's using headlights. The woman, who looked to be middle-aged, and was dressed in a white nightgown that was smeared with what appeared to be dried blood or mud, was standing there looking straight at Lisa's truck. Lisa slowed down and stopped about 20 feet away from the woman, rolled down her window, and yelled, "Mum, are you okay? Do you need anything? Assist?" After trying to talk to the woman for a few minutes, Lisa chose to drive carefully around her, but as she started to move the woman didn't even acknowledge that Lisa had spoken and instead kept staring at the truck with an expression Lisa later described as hungry, as if she were looking at a meal rather than a person. The woman's movements were odd and unnatural. She would glide from one side of the road to the other without seeming to take steps, and her feet never seemed to quite touch the ground. Lisa chose to back up and find another route, but when it became apparent that she had no intention of letting Lisa pass, she continued to move as well, always placing herself directly in front of the truck. Since she was surrounded, Lisa noticed that her truck's engine was running rough, and that the RPMs were wildly fluctuating. She put the truck in reverse and checked her mirrors, and saw that there were now more people standing behind her truck, at least 6 figures in similar stained nightgowns, all standing perfectly still and staring at her truck with the same hungry expression. Could smell something burning. Her oil pressure was dropping, and her temperature gauge was rising toward the red zone. It seemed as though whatever was going on this road was having an impact on the truck itself. Lisa had taken great care of this truck for 3 years, and it had never given her any problems. The mechanical failures were too abrupt and severe to be coincidental, and the figures surrounding her truck started to approach. Closing, their eyes were completely black with no pupils or irises visible, and when their mouths opened, Lisa could see that their teeth were pointed and sharp like shark teeth, but arranged in human jaws. Lisa could see their faces more clearly now in her headlights, and what she saw defied explanation. Their skin was pale and waxy like candle wax that had melted and reformed, in a desperate attempt to scare the woman in front of her truck into moving or, if necessary, pushing through. Lisa fired up the engine and drove directly toward her. However, as the truck drew closer, the woman simply disappeared, not jumped away, not moved aside, literally vanished like smoke. The other figures followed suit, melting into the darkness as if they had never been there. After 20 minutes of driving at dangerous speeds through the winding roads, Lisa's truck suddenly roared back to life. All mechanical issues vanished as quickly as they had appeared, and she floored the accelerator and raced down the road, oblivious to the steep hills and tight turns, focused only on getting as far away from those figures as possible. Behind her, she heard what sounded like screaming, but it was coming from the trees on either side of the road. When Lisa noticed a sign telling her that she was getting close to Highway 67, she nearly burst into tears of relief. She followed the directions and was soon back on a major road with regular traffic and working street lights. Her GPS instantly detected another signal, and her CB radio came back to life with the sound of other nearby truckers. Lisa pulled over at the first truck stop she came across. "Ma'am, you're the 7th driver this year to report getting lost on those roads and running into people in nightgowns. We've sent patrol cars to the scene." She called the Arkansas State Police to report what she had experienced. The dispatcher was courteous, but didn't seem surprised by her story. He took down her information and the approximate location where she had gotten lost, then told her something that still gives her hell. The dispatcher continued by explaining that the area Lisa had driven through was the former location of a small rural community called Millfield, which had been abandoned in the 1970s after a chemical plant explosion contaminated the groundwater. The entire town had been evacuated and the government had taken action. But we can never find the roads that drivers describe according to our maps and GPS systems. There is nothing there but dense forest. Eventually demolished all the buildings and allowed the forest to reclaim the area. But truckers, hikers, and other tourists kept reporting running into the former residents of Millfield, who didn't seem to know their town was gone. Lisa looked up the town's history when she got home and found that the chemical plant explosion had occurred at night, while the majority of the residents were asleep, and that more than 200 people had perished as a result by the time cleanup crews arrived. Many of the victims had been changed by the chemicals in ways that the official reports only describe as significant physical changes to deceased individuals. The majority of them were discovered in their beds, wearing pajamas and nightgowns, and the contamination had been so bad that the bodies couldn't be moved for weeks. It's as if there's an unwritten agreement among drivers that some places are best left unexplored, and that some roads lead to places that no living person should visit. Lisa never took that route through Arkansas again, even when construction delays would have made the detour advantageous. She's also noticed that other truckers who know the area avoid talking about those back roads and quickly change the subject when pressed for details. 3 weeks later, Lisa received a package at her home address that had no return address and a postmark from a post office that had been closed since 1978. Inside the package was a child's doll that was exactly like one of the toys she had seen in the yard of the first house where she had stopped for directions. The story of Lisa is not about the encounter itself, but rather what transpired after that. The doll was wearing her. Attached to the doll was a handwritten note in faded ink that simply said, "Thank you for visiting Millfield. We hope you'll come back soon. We get so few visitors these days, and we're always looking for new residents to join our community." The doll was a miniature nightgown stained with the same dark substance she had seen on the figures in the road. Dozens of names were written in the note's signature, distinct handwritings, as though the entire town had contributed to the message. Lisa threw the doll away right away, but the following morning it was back at her door. She burned it in her backyard, but a week later she got another package with the same note and an identical doll. This has been going on for more than 2 years, and Lisa has moved twice since the first incident, but the packages always find her. Lisa continues to drive long distances across the nation, but she has added several GPS units to her truck and keeps thorough maps of every place she visits. She has also joined online trucker forums where drivers exchange information about roads to avoid, and she has found that Millfield isn't the only community like hers. The last detail that makes Lisa's story especially terrifying is what she found when she looked into the postal records for the post office that had allegedly mailed her the dolls. According to official records, the Millfield post office had processed its last mail delivery the day before the disaster. This is true for towns across rural America that were destroyed or abandoned but still exist in some capacity, inhabited by residents who refuse to accept that their time has passed. Postal employees at the regional facility report that, despite the 1973 chemical plant explosion, they still occasionally receive outgoing mail with Millfield postmarks, always addressed to truck drivers who have reported getting lost in the area. The Postal Service has no idea how or who is creating these letters, but they are still delivered because, in theory, the addresses are real and the postage is correct. In March 2020, veteran driver Marcus Thompson was transporting auto parts from Detroit to Phoenix. Marcus had been using the same CB radio for more than 12 years, a dependable Cobra 29 that had never given him any trouble and had been his constant companion through countless lonely hours. This story, despite the fact that the stamps being used were discontinued decades ago, is about something that every trucker relies on, but rarely questions: CB radios. Around 11 p.m., Marcus was driving through a particularly barren section of Interstate 40 in New Mexico when his CB sprang to life with a transmission that instantly caught his attention. A voice on Channel 19 in the white Peterbilt said, as day came through, "This is your..." He was driving a white Peterbilt, so the description was accurate, but Marcus couldn't understand how someone could see his truck when there was no other traffic visible. "Shadow, you have a problem with your left rear trailer tire. Better pull over and check it before you have a blowout." Marcus checked his mirrors, but couldn't see any trucks behind him. The highway was completely empty in both directions, which wasn't unusual for that area at that time of night. Truckers take it easy, so Marcus chose to pull over at the next open spot and do a quick check. Using a flashlight, Marcus walked around his trailer and found that his left rear tire was in fact developing a dangerous bulge on the sidewall, the kind of defect that could cause a catastrophic blowout at highway speeds. Marcus was thankful for the warning, but he was also perplexed as to who had given it to him and how they had been able to see his truck so clearly when he "Hey Shadow, this is the white Pete you warned about the tire," Marcus said, keying his CB radio so that he could see them. The message came soon away. "Don't worry about where I am. I want to thank you for the heads up. I have a bad sidewall bulge. Where are you running?" I don't see any trucks in either direction. Even for experienced mechanics, it was nearly impossible to predict when a sidewall would fail, so Marcus found the precision of the warning unsettling. "Driver, just focus on getting that tire changed safely. You have about 40 minutes before that sidewall gives out completely." The voice on the radio seemed absolute, as if the speaker had your want to double check those lug nuts. "The third one from the top is still loose." Marcus checked, and sure enough, he had forgotten to tighten one of the nuts properly. A state trooper is about 15 miles ahead running radar, so keep it in mind. Marcus had somehow already witnessed the tire failure and was working backward from that knowledge. He worked to change the tire. When you return to driving, to being under 70, all of the information the voice gave you turns out to be true. But what's most unsettling is what the voice knew about Marcus personally. During the hour it took to change the tire, the enigmatic CB operator started disclosing personal information about Marcus that no stranger should have known. "How is your daughter Sarah doing in her nursing program? It must be difficult to have her so far," the voice went on. "That chest pain you've been having, you really should see a doctor about that when you get home. It's not just heartburn, as you keep telling yourself." Marcus had never mentioned his daughter on the CB radio while she was away at school, and Sarah was in fact a nursing student at a university 800 miles from home. Marcus had been going through. As Marcus finished changing the tire and got ready to go back on the road, he attempted once more to identify his helpful but enigmatic companion shadow. "I truly appreciate all your help tonight. What's your problem?" Marcus had been experiencing occasional chest discomfort for several weeks, but he hadn't mentioned it to anyone, not even his wife. He had been blaming it on stress and bad truck stop food. After a lengthy pause, the response arrived. "My handle used to be Knight Rider, but I haven't used it since the accident." Marcus asked what accident it was, but the voice seemed hesitant to provide more details. Eventually, after a few minutes of silence, the response arrived. Marcus lost control and went off the road on the same stretch of highway at night when his tire blew out at mile marker 127. This happened approximately 6 years ago. "As you pass the white cross with the plastic flowers my wife placed there," Marcus felt a chill go down his spine, because the voice was claiming to be that of a deceased trucker who had perished in the same kind of accident that Marcus had. Simply brushed it off as someone making a mean joke, but the amount of information about his private life and the precision of all the warnings pointed to something much more disturbing. As Marcus passed mile marker 127, his headlights revealed a white wooden cross on the side of the road, precisely where the voice had predicted it would be plastic flowers that had faded from years of weather. Marcus pulled over and walked to the mark. His hands were shaking as he keyed his CB radio one last time. "Knight Rider, are you still out there?" The answer came through clearly, but with a sadness that seemed to reverberate across the desert. "I'm always out here." He discovered a small metal plate with the inscription Thomas Knight Rider Williams 1962 to 2014. His beloved husband and father. "Keep the shiny side up." The radio went silent after that, and Marcus never heard from Knight Rider again. However, 3 days later, when Marcus arrived home in Michigan, he scheduled a meeting with his doctor. "Marcus, this highway holds on to some of us. I couldn't help myself that night, but perhaps I can help other drivers avoid the same fate. Take care of yourself and get that chest looked at. Your daughter needs her dad around for a long time." According to his cardiologist, Marcus's tests indicated a serious heart condition that needed immediate surgery. Marcus would have likely suffered a massive heart attack while driving if he had ignored the symptoms for even a few more weeks. Marcus looked into Thomas Williams and found out that he had actually been a truck driver who died in a single vehicle accident at mile marker 127 in 2014. Williams had been driving for more than 20 years and was well known among other truckers for his readiness to assist other drivers with road advice and mechanical issues. His wife verified that he had been traveling from Detroit to Phoenix when the accident happened, and the most horrifying fact Marcus learned was that Thomas Williams had passed away precisely 6 years to the day before Marcus's encounter with the voice on July 1st, Channel 19. Which is broadcast annually on the anniversary of his. Marcus continues to drive that route frequently and always pays close attention to his CB radio when he passes mile marker 127. He has never heard from Knight Rider again, but other truckers have informed him that the warnings about road hazards from someone going by the name Knight Rider on that mile marker are always accurate and have prevented dozens of accidents over the years. Our fourth story takes us to a situation that every trucker has faced at some point: the decision of whether or not to pick up a hitchhiker. This account comes from driver Angela Rivera, who has seen similar warnings in the same area. The trucking community has started to refer to that stretch of highway as Knight Rider's Beat, and many drivers make it a point to thank the guardian spirit who continues to watch over his fellow truckers long after his own journey ends. Had been hauling freight for 9 years and had a strict personal policy of never picking up strangers. This policy saved her life on many occasions, but it was nearly broken by what appeared to be an innocent encounter on highway 2 in North Dakota during a severe winter storm in January 2022. Angela was traveling east toward Fargo with a load of farming equipment when the storm struck with a vengeance, visibility dropping to nearly zero and the wind howling across the road. Angela had slowed to about 30 miles per hour and was thinking about stopping to wait out the worst of the storm when she noticed a young woman, possibly in her early 20s, standing next to the road. She was dressed in jeans and a thin jacket that was completely inappropriate for the freezing temperatures, and she wasn't actively trying to flag down traffic. Instead, she was just standing there in the blowing snow, about 10 feet from the highway. The planes were pushing her 60,000-pound truck sideways. The sight of this girl standing in a deadly blizzard without appropriate clothing made Angela reconsider her initial plan to keep driving. Her company had strict policies against picking up hitchhikers, and she had never broken any of them. She pulled over about 50 yards past the girl's location and sat in her idling truck for several minutes, considering her options. The outside temperature was -20, with a wind chill that made it feel like Angela finally made the choice that most likely saved both of their lives. She put the truck in reverse and backed up to where the girl was standing, rolled down her passenger window, and yelled, "Hey, do you need a ride?" It was about -40 degrees outside, and no one could survive for very long without adequate shelter. Assist. My car broke down about a mile back, and the girl called out over the wind, "It's dangerous to be out in this weather." She looked up at Angela with what seemed to be genuine relief and gratitude, but her lips were already blue from the cold, and she was shivering uncontrollably. After nearly an hour of searching for assistance, Angela hesitated for a moment before unlocking the passenger door. The girl entered the cab and brought with her a blast of cold air and a sweet, cloying smell that Angela couldn't quite place, like flowers that had been left in water for too long. The girl identified herself as Jennifer and explained that her car had, she claimed, that she had attempted to call for assistance after sliding off the road into a ditch, but her phone had died, and the storm was getting worse by the minute. Angela felt sorry for her and was happy that she had chosen to assist Jennifer, who appeared courteous and appreciative. She also assured her that she would only require a ride to the next truck stop. When Angela offered her a blanket from her sleeper berth, Jennifer's skin felt freezing to the touch, as though the cold had gotten so deep that even artificial heat couldn't warm her up. This was in spite of the fact that she had been standing in sub-zero weather for more than an hour, and that the truck's heater was running at full blast. Jennifer's lips remained blue, and she was still shivering. Angela saw something that made her stomach drop 20 meters down the road. In her side mirror, she could see another set of headlights following them, maintaining a steady distance despite the hazardous road conditions and poor visibility. When Angela slowed down, the following car slowed down as well, and when she sped up a little, it matched her pace. When Angela told Jennifer that she needed to stop at a way station that was approaching in a few miles to check her load security, Jennifer's reaction was immediate and alarming. She became agitated and insisted that they continue driving because stopping would be dangerous in the storm. Angela had learned to trust her instincts during her years on the road, and something about this situation felt like a setup. Jennifer took Angela's arm with unexpected firmness and exclaimed, "No, we can't stop. They're waiting for us to stop." Even though it would only take a few minutes, Jennifer only gazed out the passenger window and murmured something about having to keep moving when Angela questioned who they were. At that point, Angela observed that Jennifer's breathing wasn't normal and that her chest wasn't rising and falling as it should. When Angela looked closely, she saw that Jennifer wasn't breathing at all. There was no fogging of the windows, no visible breath in the cold air, and the realization hit her like a physical blow. Whatever was sitting in Jennifer's passenger seat was something completely different, and it was using Jennifer's appearance to win Angela's cooperation and trust. She was alone on a deserted highway in a blizzard with something inhuman sitting 3 feet away from her. Angela chose to play along while she came up with an escape plan. She continued driving toward the truck stop she had mentioned, but as they approached, Jennifer grew more agitated and kept glancing in the mirrors and muttering about them catching. She kept her expression neutral while her mind raced through her options. At last, with a non-human expression, Jennifer turned to face Angela. Her eyes had turned pitch black, and as she smiled, Angela could see that her teeth were pointy and sharp. "You know what I am, don't you?" In a voice that was no longer quite human, Jennifer said. "I can smell your dread." It's delicious. Angela's blood turned to ice, but she forced herself to keep driving steadily toward the truck stop. Jennifer went on to explain everything, saying, "We've been hunting this highway for 3 winters now. I stand in the cold to attract the sympathetic ones, the drivers who can't resist helping someone in distress. My friends then follow us until we arrive at a remote location where they can take the truck, and then normally we let the drivers leave after the cargo. But recently, we've been getting hungry." Angela noticed that the headlights following them belonged to Jennifer's accomplices, and that she was being led into a trap. But she also realized that Jennifer had made a critical error by disclosing that there was an afterward for some drivers, meaning that not all of after their victims were killed right away. Angela made the decision to move to a truck stop where she thought there might be other people and security cameras. As they got closer, Angela noticed that the truck stop was well lit and seemed to be open, with multiple other trucks parked there. Jennifer grew more agitated and insisted that they drive past it and continue to a more private area. Despite her protests, Angela ignored them and got into the truck. Angela had noticed something significant. Jennifer had not touched the door handle since getting into the truck and appeared unable to operate any of the truck's controls. Jennifer, whoever she was, seemed to be bound by some sort of rules that prevented her from hurting Angela while they were inside the truck. She stopped the parking lot and drove straight toward the main building where the lights were brightest. Jennifer made her final threat. "If you don't drive away from here right now, I'll kill you where you sit." Alternatively, on public property, Angela parked right in front of the truck stop's main entrance and started honking her horn repeatedly. In a matter of seconds, other truckers and truck stop staff were arriving outside to investigate the emergency. Angela yelled, "This isn't human. She's been trying to trick me." Jennifer's shriek broke both of the truck's side windows, and she just disappeared like smoke without opening the door or running. The temperature in the cab instantly returned to normal, and the sweet, cloying smell that had been bothering Angela vanished right away. The other truckers assisted Angela in calling the police, and when they got there, they discovered something unsettling in the security camera footage from the truck stop. Even more unsettling was what the police found when they looked into Angela's route. A car in a ditch about a mile from where Angela had picked up Jennifer was, in fact, there for more than 6 months, and it was registered to a person who had been there for more than 6 months. The cameras clearly showed Angela's truck pulling up and her getting out, but they never showed any passengers in the truck. The police confirmed that Angela was the 4th trucker in 2 years to report picking up a hitchhiker who fit Jennifer Walsh's description on that same stretch of highway during winter storms. In each case, the drivers reported being followed by mysterious vehicles. Jennifer Walsh, a 22-year-old college student, vanished during a blizzard the previous winter, and her body was discovered frozen solid in the car, still wearing the same jeans and thin jacket that the hitchhiker had been wearing. Angela discovered that highway to through North Dakota has one of the highest rates of missing trucker cases in the nation, with over a dozen drivers going missing without explanation. The 3 previous drivers, feeling as though they were being led into a trap, had all managed to escape by stopping at public locations, but 2 other truckers had completely vanished on that highway during that time period. Their trucks were found abandoned with no trace of the drivers. Angela still occasionally drives that route, but never during winter storms, and she has added more security cameras to her truck that record the inside and outside. She has also joined a network of truckers who believe that there is an organized group that uses supernatural bait to lure truckers into remote areas. However, local law enforcement has been unable to apprehend the perpetrators or determine exactly how they are operating for the past 5 years. The last terrifying detail of Angela's story is what she learned when she looked into Jennifer Walsh's disappearance. According to police reports, Jennifer was driving to visit relatives when her car went off the road during the incident. They share real-time information about suspicious activity on dangerous routes, and most importantly, she has never thought about breaking her rule about picking up hitchhikers, no matter how desperate their situation appears to be. Jennifer Walsh was driving west when she crashed, but the hitchhiker posing as her was standing on the eastbound side of the highway, seemingly attempting to retrace her route in the opposite direction, luring drivers back toward the scene of her death. This is the thing that keeps Angela awake at night, though, and our fifth story addresses something that keeps many truckers awake at night. The fear of this account comes from veteran driver Carl Matthews, who had been driving cross-country for 15 years and took pride in being dependable and professional. Companies trusted Carl with their most sensitive and valuable shipments, which is why he was selected for what appeared to be a routine but lucrative job in September 2021. Carl received a call from his dispatcher, informed him of a special delivery that required complete discretion. The cargo was a single shipping container that needed to be moved from a private warehouse outside of Memphis to a research facility in Colorado. The pay was extraordinary, nearly 3 times his usual rate, and the only conditions were that Carl have to drive through the container without stopping for long periods of time, and that he could not open the container under any circumstances. Could not discuss the cargo with anyone. The pickup location was unusual from the start. Instead of a normal loading dock, Carl was directed to an isolated warehouse complex about 30 meters outside of Memphis, surrounded by high fences and security cameras. The facility looked more like a government installation than a commercial shipping operation. Carl was met by men in dark suits who checked his identification multiple times and had him sign several. The container itself was unlike anything Carl had ever hauled. It was a typical 20-foot shipping container on the outside, but it had been heavily modified with additional locks, reinforcement plates, and what looked like some sort of ventilation system. Most unnerving of all, the container had temperature monitoring equipment and what appeared to be motion sensors attached to the exterior walls. Confidentiality agreements were required before he was allowed onto the property. Carl was given a sealed envelope with his delivery instructions, which he was instructed not to open until he was 50 miles from the pickup location. Carl had previously transported classified government cargo, so the security measures were very meticulous and methodical, utilizing specialized equipment to secure it to his trailer. They also insisted on testing the restraint systems several times. Carl started his journey toward Colorado, and for the first few hours everything seemed normal. The container was well balanced and didn't affect his truck's handling, and he made good time on the interstate highways. However, about 4 hours into the trip, as evening was approaching, something about the entire operation felt different, more urgent, and more secretive than usual. Carl started to hear odd noises coming from his trailer as he got closer. At first, he thought the noises were caused by normal road vibration and cargo shifting, but as he paid closer attention, he noticed that the sounds seemed rhythmic and intentional, as if something was moving around inside the container, not rolling or sliding like loose cargo, but moving with purpose. Carl tried to. As darkness descended, Carl could hear what sounded like scratching or scraping against the interior walls of the container, always from the same spot near the front of the trailer. He dismissed his worries, telling himself that the container was supposed to be sealed, and that he was probably just hearing highway noise or mechanical sounds from his truck. However, the sounds persisted and grew louder, finish, then pick up the pace. Carl started to worrying that there might be an animal trapped in the container, but the shipping documents made it very evident that the cargo was research materials and made no mention of livestock. At around 1000 p.m., Carl pulled over at a truck, stopping Kansas to fill up and get some food. There were tiny droplets of what appeared to be blood leaking from the bottom seal of the container as he was walking around his truck performing his routine safety inspection. It wasn't much, just a few drops here and there, but enough to create little puddles underneath the trailer. Carl's first instinct was to call his dispatcher, but the confidentiality agreements he had signed explicitly forbade him from speaking to anyone regarding the cargo other than, since the container itself seemed safe and undamaged. Carl wasn't sure if a few drops of what might be blood constituted a serious emergency. Nevertheless, he kept his cell phone ready and his CB radio tuned to channel 19 in case he needed to call for assistance. Throughout the night, the scratching sounds from the container continued, occasionally getting loud enough for Carl to hear over the sounds of his engine and the road. The fact that the sounds seemed to react to outside stimuli every time Carl applied the brakes or changed lanes made it even more unsettling. It was as though whatever was within the container could perceive the truck's movements. At 3 in the morning, Carl was traveling through a secluded area when he came across something that still bothers him. Carl's truck had a sophisticated load monitoring system that could detect cargo shifts, and when his truck's motion sensors started noting movements on the trailer, not the typical vibration of road travel, but distinct motion as if something heavy was moving around inside the container, they detected that something weighing about 200 pounds was moving freely inside the ostensibly sealed container. Carl pulled over at a rest area to look around, but as soon as the truck completely stopped, all movement inside the container stopped, the scratching sound stopped, the motion sensors went back to normal, and everything became eerily quiet. Carl used a flashlight to walk around the trailer and found something that caused him to reevaluate everything he believed to be true about it. The most unsettling of all were the handprints on the outside of the container, which were human handprints that had been pressed against the metal from the inside with such force that they had left visible impressions on the exterior walls. The prints were concentrated around what an adult's eye level would have been, as if someone had been attempting to push their way out of the container. There were also traces of moisture that appeared to be perspiration or condensation from human skin. Carl called the shipping company's emergency number right away, but the phone kept ringing without anyone picking up. He tried calling his dispatcher, but all he got was a message stating that the number was out of service. Carl was starting to suspect that he had been misled about the nature of his cargo, and that he might be involved in something risky or illegal, when he heard the voice, which was muffled and distorted by the man's voice, which was weak and desperate, like that of someone who had been trapped 4 days without food or water, was calling out, "Help me, please help me. I don't know where I am. Please don't leave me in here." Carl attempted to respond, saying, "I'm going to get you out of there. Can you tell me how many people are in the container with you?" When Carl discovered he was transporting kidnapped individuals, and that some of them had already passed away during the trip, he contacted 911 right once. The response shocked him to the bone. "There are 3 of us left. There were more, but they didn't make it. Please hurry. We don't have much time left." Reported his location and circumstances to Colorado State Police. Within 20 minutes, police and emergency vehicles had surrounded the rest area, and a specialized hazmat team started working to safely open the container. What they discovered inside was completely empty, save for what appeared to be medical monitoring equipment and a sophisticated climate control system. This information defied explanation and contradicted everything Carl believed he knew about his cargo. The monitoring equipment inside the container was still recording vital signs, heart rates, breathing patterns, and brain activity for 3 different people, which the medical professional found to be the most unsettling of all. There were no people living or dead inside the container, but there was evidence that people had recently been inside, including food wrappers, personal belongings, and what looked like makeshift bedding in one corner. The police investigation showed that Carl had been employed by a shell company with ties to illegal human trafficking operations, but the organization vanished entirely after Carl's death. According to readouts, 3 people were alive and conscious inside the container, but no one was there. The equipment was detecting the presence of people who couldn't be seen or found. Carl was eventually exonerated of any wrongdoing when investigators determined that he had been duped and coerced by the trafficking organization. The warehouse where he had picked up the container was discovered deserted, with no sign of the men who had loaded his truck. More enigmatically, there was no record of the container ever existing. The serial numbers were phony, and the shipping documents he had been given were sophisticated forgeries. Carl retired from long-haul trucking right after the incident, and he currently works for a local delivery company that only handles deliveries. However, the FBI believes that Carl may have unintentionally interfered with a supernatural human trafficking operation that uses technology beyond current scientific understanding. The case was never solved, and the fate of the people whose voices Carl heard and whose vital signs were detected by the monitoring equipment remains unknown. The most terrifying part of Carl's story is that 6 months after the incident, he received a package at his house without a return address that contained a USB drive with video footage from inside the container during the incident. He has also become an advocate for truckers' rights and safety, speaking at industry conferences about the importance of knowing what you're hauling and trusting your instincts when something doesn't feel right. The video from his journey shows 3 people, 2 men and a woman, trapped inside a container, but the timestamps on the video match exactly when police discovered the container empty. The people in the video are yelling for assistance and specifically mentioning Carl, pleading with him to stop and allow them to leave. Carl gave the USB drive to federal investigators, but they haven't been able to provide an explanation for how the video was made or where the individuals in the video are currently. The FBI believes that Carl's experience is only one example of a much larger operation that continues to exploit the trucking industry for purposes that may go far beyond traditional human trafficking. The investigation is still ongoing, and they continue to receive reports of truckers being hired for similar mysterious. The 24-hour truck stops are meant to be safe havens, which is why driver Rebecca Santos' story is so unsettling. Rebecca had been a professional driver for 11 years and was familiar with almost all of the major truck stops between California and New York. So when she pulled into what looked like a brand new facility on Interstate 70 in Missouri at 2:30 a.m., she assumed she had just stumbled upon a recently opened location. Rebecca had driven this route dozens of times over the years and had never seen this specific truck stop before, but new facilities were always opening, and the signs looked professional. It was on a Tuesday in October 2021 that she noticed the truck stop signs advertising Big Jim's 24-hour plaza, next exit, all services available. The truck stop looked completely normal from the highway bright lights, with a large parking area with plenty of space for big rigs and a modern-looking main building with a typical convenience store and restaurant setup. Rebecca decided to check it out because she needed fuel and a break. When she pulled into the fuel island, she noticed that even though it was well past midnight, the place was busy with other truckers fueling up, and as Rebecca entered the lot, everything appeared to be going according to plan. She started filling up her truck with diesel and saw that the price was much less than what she had been seeing at other stops, nearly 40 cents less per gallon than the national average. When she told the attendant who came out to clean her windshield about this, he grinned and said, "We keep our prices low to build customer loyalty. Once you stop, you'll want to return here." Rebecca felt a little uneasy about the way he said it, but she was grateful for the savings and went inside to get some coffee and snacks. The truck stop's interior was stunning, clean, well stocked, and modern, with a restaurant area that served hot food despite the late hour. Rebecca also noticed that there were quite a Rebecca found it strange that everyone was so quiet. There was none of the typical trucker conversation and camaraderie that you'd expect to find at a busy truck stop. There were a few other truckers inside, some eating at the restaurant, others browsing the merchandise aisles, and a few more just sitting in the seating area drinking coffee. Rebecca picked up her belongings and went to the checkout counter, where a pleasant middle-aged woman rang up her. "Will you be staying with us tonight? We have great sleeping facilities, and many of our customers find that once they rest here, they don't want to leave." The cashier questioned Rebecca as she processed her payment. Rebecca graciously rejected, stating that she would rather sleep in her own truck. However, the clerk's reply was unusual, is what they all say at first, but big gyms have a way of making people notice things. As Rebecca made her way back to her truck, she noticed that the other truckers in the parking lot were moving very slowly and deliberately, almost like they were sleepwalking, and that several drivers were simply standing next to their trucks, staring into space without doing anything useful. Rebecca made the decision to leave right away when she tried to wave or make eye contact with other drivers, but they either ignored her or gave her blank looks that seemed to look right through her. However, when she got into her truck and tried to start the engine, nothing happened. All of her electrical systems, including the lights and radio dashboard, were operational, but the engine wouldn't start. Rebecca had been driving this truck for 3 years without any mechanical issues. When Rebecca got to the truck stop, she tried a few more times, but the engine was still completely dead. She went back inside to see if a mechanic was on duty, but the same clerk who had served her earlier seemed unsurprised by the issue, saying, "Oh, that happens sometimes. Don't worry. Our maintenance staff can look at it in the morning." Rebecca insisted that she needed to get back on the road right away and asked if anyone could look at her truck right away. The clerk pointed her in the direction of a man named Jim, who was sitting in the restaurant area drinking coffee. Jim was a big, amiable man in his 60s who greeted Rebecca warmly. "Rest up. We have very comfortable sleeping rooms available," offered to look at her truck. Jim accompanied Rebecca to the parking lot and spent roughly 15 minutes inspecting her engine. He said he had discovered a loose electrical connection, and after some tinkering under the hood, Rebecca's engine started right away. She was appreciative of the assistance and offered to pay Jim for his time, but he declined, saying, "Just remember us when you're driving through a game." With a smile that didn't, Rebecca thanked Jim and got ready to leave. But while doing her pre-trip inspection, she discovered something that made her very uneasy. Every truck in the parking lot had the same modification, a tiny electronic device attached to the engine compartment that she didn't recognize. When she looked more closely at her own truck, she discovered that the same device had been installed while Jim was resolving her electrical issue, but Rebecca was unaware of it. What the device was, but instinct told her to leave this truck stop right away. She carefully took the device out and threw it in a trash can before rushing out of the parking lot without turning around. As she drove away, she checked her rearview mirrors and noticed something that confirmed her suspicions. A convoy of trucks was leaving the parking lot behind her, starting to follow. Rebecca tried calling other drivers on her CB radio to report the situation, but all she got in return were vague messages like "You can't leave Big Jim's and come back to the plaza where you belong." Rebecca drove as fast as she could safely down the highway, but the convoy of trucks followed her for more than 50 miles, never changing their distance. The radio voices all sounded emotionless and flat, as if they were speaking against their will. Rebecca eventually lost her following by making an unplanned detour and traveling through a number of back roads until she came to another truck stop that she knew was real. She called the police right away to report what had happened, but when she attempted to give the address of Big Jim's 24-hour, the police were courteous, but doubtful until Rebecca showed them the electronic device she had taken from her truck. The officers had never seen anything like it before and called in experts from the Missouri State Police to look at it. According to her GPS and the trucking atlas, there was no truck stop at that exit on Interstate 70. Rebecca gave police thorough directions to the truck stop, and when they investigated the next day, they discovered an empty lot with what turned out to be a sophisticated tracking and control system that could remotely monitor and disable vehicle engines. The technology was far more advanced than anything commercially available, and investigators were unable to determine who had manufactured it. Local records indicated that a business known as Big Jim's Plaza had been operating there in the 1980s and 1990s before closing permanently after the owner, James Big Jim Morrison, died in a trucking accident in 1999. Rebecca was not the first driver to report seeing the phantom truck, according to the concrete foundations of a truck stop that had been demolished more than 20 years prior. Missouri State Police received at least 8 similar reports from truckers over the course of the previous 15 years, claiming to have stopped at Big Jim's 24-hour plaza, only to learn later that the establishment was non-existent. In each case, the drivers reported mechanical issues that were mysteriously fixed by a helpful man named Jim, and several of them reported discovering unidentified electronic devices attached to their trucks. The most unsettling of these reports was from the missing truckers were last seen on traffic cameras passing the exit where Big Jim's Plaza was supposed to be, so Rebecca changed her usual route to avoid that. All police found that 3 truckers who had reported stopping at the phantom truck stop had since vanished while traveling through Missouri. Their trucks were found abandoned at various locations along Interstate 70 with no trace of the drivers and no indication of what had happened to them. Portion of Interstate 70. But 6 months after her encounter, she got a postcard in the mail saying, "We miss you at Big Jim's. Your sleeping room is still available whenever you're ready to come home." The postcard was sent from a Missouri post office, but when Rebecca called postal authorities, they had no information about it. When Rebecca told other truckers about her experience with the phantom truck stop, they found a troubling trend. Drivers who reported seeing it frequently received similar postcards and calls urging them to return. Several truckers also reported that their GPS systems would sometimes attempt to direct them to the non-existent truck stop, showing directions to Big Jim's Plaza even when they were hundreds of miles away. The FBI has classified the case as a possible fraud operation involving advanced technology, but they have not discovered any evidence of who might be running such a scheme or what their ultimate goal might be. The investigation into Big Jim's Plaza, which is miles away from Missouri, is still ongoing, but authorities have not been able to explain how multiple truckers can have nearly identical experiences at a location that does not exist. In order to avoid depending on electronic navigation, Rebecca still drives professionally, but has installed multiple backup GPS units and keeps paper maps with her. She has also joined an unofficial trucker network that exchanges information about suspicious truck stops and strange experiences on the road. Most importantly, however, is that she has learned to completely trust her gut when something feels off, regardless of how normal it seems on the road. The last disturbing detail of Rebecca's story is what happened when she looked into James Big Jim Morrison, the truck stop's original owner. According to newspaper accounts from 1999, Morrison died when his truck's brakes failed on a steep grade, causing him to crash into a bridge abutment. The accident report stated that this account from driver James explains why some truckers develop superstitions about specific types of cargo, and Morrison's truck had an experimental electronic braking system that malfunctioned and caused the fatal crash. The technology was similar in design to the device Rebecca discovered attached to her own truck, a device that could remotely control vehicle functions and potentially cause accidents that would appear to be mechanical failures. It was profitable work that paid well above standard freight rates, but James learned that some cargo has a price that cannot be measured in dollars. In November 2020, James was contracted to transport high-value items that required extra security and careful handling for auction houses and private collectors. Mitchell will explain why James had been driving for 13 years. Transport a collection of antique furniture from a Savannah, Georgia, estate sale to a private collector in Portland, Oregon. The shipper, an elderly man named Harrison Blackwood, claimed to be selling off his late father's estate. The furniture pieces were said to be from the 1800s and included a number of dining room and bedroom sets, as well as what Blackwood called a very special armwire that had been in my family for when James arrived at the pickup location, a sprawling Victorian mansion on the outskirts of Savannah that appeared to have been neglected for decades. He was immediately struck by Blackwood's strange demeanor. He was extremely pale, soft-spoken, and insisted that the furniture be loaded in a precise order, with the armwire placed at the very front of the house. The house was surrounded by overgrown gardens and seemed to loom over the landscape despite the bright afternoon sunshine, because Blackwood insisted on personally overseeing each piece as it was moved from the house to James's trailer. The loading process took the majority of the afternoon. What surprised James was how cold the furniture felt, despite the fact that it had been sitting in a house without air conditioning on a warm Georgia day. Each piece seemed to absorb heat rather than radiate it, and James found himself shivering every time he handled it. The objects in the armoire that Blackwood had described were especially unnerving. It was a huge piece that was almost 8 feet tall, composed of dark wood that seemed to absorb light instead of reflect it, and elaborately carved with figures that looked like angels and demons entwined in different positions. What unnerved James was that the carved figures seemed to change depending on the angle from which you viewed them. Blackwood insisted that the arm would be kept locked during transportation, appearing demonic from one side. He also gave James a very clear warning: never open this piece or let anyone else look at it. The lock is there for everyone's protection. James had previously transported valuable antiques and was used to security requirements, but something in Blackwood's tone suggested that the James started his cross-country trip late in the afternoon, with the intention of driving through the night to make up time. But for the first few hours, as darkness descended, everything appeared to be normal. At first, he thought the noises were caused by the furniture moving and settling normally, but as he listened more, he realized that there was more to be concerned about than theft or damage. James pulled over at a rest area around midnight to check his load securement, and what he discovered made his blood run cold. The sounds were rhythmic and deliberate, like someone moving around inside the trailer. They sounded like wood creaking and groaning, but not from temperature changes or vibrations in the road. James was certain that the lock had been secure when they loaded the piece, and that there was no way it could have opened accidentally during transport. But the condition of the armwire was more worrisome. The massive piece remained in its original position, but the lock that Blackwood had been so worried about was now hanging open. James approached the armwire cautiously and noticed that the carve during the night. The noises from the trailer grew louder and more unsettling. James heard what sounded like voices and muffled conversations coming from inside the armwire, as if multiple people were inside it. The figures on its surface seemed more pronounced in the dim light of the rest area, their expressions appearing more sinister and lifelike. James chose not to investigate further and swiftly resecured the load before getting back on the road. Around 3 in the morning, they were confined inside and attempting to speak to one another. Exatin James was traveling through a desolate area of Arkansas when he heard something that caused him to apply his brakes hard and stop right away. From his trailer, he could clearly hear a woman screaming, not just a short cry, but a protracted, anguished scream that appeared to emanate from within. The armwire itself James sat in his idle truck for a few minutes listening, but the trailer had gone completely silent. James tried calling the Portland auction house that was supposed to receive the furniture, but they had never heard of Harrison Blackwood or any scheduled furniture delivery from Georgia. James also tried calling the emergency number Blackwood had provided him, but the phone was disconnected. James was sitting in his truck trying to decide what to do when he noticed movement in his side mirrors. The arm wire, which was placed near the front of his trailer and visible through his rear window, seemed to be rocking back and forth slightly. The movement was subtle but consistent, as if something inside the massive piece was trying to get out. James was starting to realize that he might have been misled about the nature of his cargo and the legitimacy of the delivery. Despite the mild Arkansas weather, James also noticed that the temperature around his truck was rapidly dropping. Despite this, he decided to keep driving and call the police at the next major town. However, just as he was about to pull back onto the highway, he heard a young woman's voice calling his name. The voice came clearly from his trailer and was saying, "James, please help us. We've been trapped in here for so long. Please open the door and let us out." Throughout the night, he heard several voices, men, women, and children begging to be freed from the arm wire. They said they had been trapped there for decades, some for more than a century, and they described the interior of the arm wire as a place of unending darkness and cold. James ignored the voice, which sounded desperate and pleading, but the pleas persisted. The fact that they knew specifics about James's life, including his wife's name, his home, and his preferred trucking route, was especially unsettling. By dawn, the armoire itself was standing open, revealing an interior that seemed to be much larger than the piece's external dimensions would allow. Inside the armoire, police discovered dozens of personal items, including jewelry, photos, clothing, and identification documents. All of the furniture had moved from its secured position and was now arranged in a perfect circle around the armoire, as if the pieces had repositioned themselves during transport. Police contacted authorities in Savannah to look into Harrison Blackwood and the Victorian mansion where James had picked up the furniture, because all of the items, which date back to the 1800s, belonged to people who had been reported missing over the previous 150 years, many of whom were from the Savannah area. What's most disturbing, that none of the items showed signs of age or deterioration, as if they had been preserved in some sort of temporal bubble. They found that the house had been abandoned since 1987, when Harrison Blackwood Sr., the last known occupant, vanished under mysterious circumstances. The property management company that owned the house at the time had been trying to sell it for decades, but had failed to find buyers because of reports of paranormal activity. Further research showed that the armoire had a history of the piece, had been sold and resold multiple times over the years, and each owner had eventually abandoned it after experiencing supernatural phenomena. Historical records revealed that the piece had belonged to a wealthy Savannah family in the 1850s, and that more than a dozen people had disappeared while the armoire was in their possession. James was released without charges after police confirmed that James quit long-haul trucking right away after the incident because he had been misled about the nature of his cargo. The furniture was taken into evidence and eventually given to a group of paranormal investigators who focused on haunted objects. The armoire and the other pieces were eventually destroyed in a controlled burn, but witnesses claimed that the fire burned with an odd blue flame, and that screaming could be heard from the flames until the furniture was completely consumed. The most disturbing part of James' story is what happened to the man who claimed to be Harrison Blackwood. Police were never able to find him or ascertain his true identity, and security cameras at the Savannah mansion revealed that he is now employed by a local delivery company that only handles verified cargo with full documentation. He has also turned into an advocate for trucker safety and often speaks about the significance of confirming the legitimacy of shippers and cargo before accepting unusual or high-paying loads. 6 months after the incident, James received a package in the mail that contained a small wooden figurine carved in the same style as the decorations on the armoire. The figurine bore an uncanny resemblance to James himself, and attached to it was a note. James arrived for the pickup, but they showed no other people on the property at any time. According to the video evidence, James also appeared to be loading furniture alone while speaking to someone who wasn't there. The package had no return address and a postmark from Savannah, but postal authorities had no record of it being processed through their system. Instead, James keeps the figurine locked in a safe deposit box at his bank. That said, thank you for your service. The collection continues to grow, and we always need reliable transportation. According to James, he sometimes gets late-night phone calls from people who say they are stuck and need a ride to join the collection. The calls always come from numbers in the Savannah area code, but when James tries to call the numbers back, they are always disconnected. James thinks that he was singled out because of his reputation for handling valuable and unusual cargo, and that other drivers may have been the victims of similar paranormal shipping schemes. The narrative addresses one of the most basic presumptions we have about the world, that time passes in a straight line, and that if you keep driving, you will eventually arrive at your destination. Patricia Williams, a seasoned driver with 16 years of experience hauling freight, took pride in her dependability and punctuality. Patricia was well known in the industry for her ability to deliver any load on time, regardless of weather. Or in March 2022, Patricia's dispatcher called her about an urgent delivery that needed to be finished in a very short amount of time. The cargo was medical equipment being transported from a pharmaceutical company in Ohio to a research hospital in Nevada. The shipper was willing to pay premium rates for expedited delivery, and Patricia's truck was equipped with mechanical issues that would test her reputation in ways she never could have predicted. The pickup proceeded smoothly at a contemporary pharmaceutical facility outside of Columbus, outfitted with the climate control systems required to maintain the exact temperature requirements for the sensitive equipment. The cargo included multiple large crates filled with what the shipping documents described as experimental diagnostic equipment valued at over $2 million. Technicians wearing protective suits loaded the crates with extreme care, and Patricia started her journey westward on Interstate 70 with the intention of driving straight through to Nevada, with only brief stops for fuel and required rest breaks. The cargo was time-sensitive and needed to arrive at the hospital within 72 hours to be used in an experimental procedure scheduled, so she followed very specific instructions about maintaining temperature and avoiding any sudden movements or vibrations that could damage the sensitive instruments inside. For the first 8 hours of the journey, everything went smoothly. Patricia kept her trailer at the proper temperature and tracked the cargo status using an advanced tracking system that the pharmaceutical company had installed. Patricia had made similar runs previously and was sure she could easily meet the deadline for the following week. The equipment was operating flawlessly, and Patricia was actually running ahead of schedule. Patricia entered Illinois at around 1000 p.m., but as she drove through a particularly unremarkable stretch of Interstate 70 near Effingham, Illinois, a straight, flat section of highway that she had driven dozens of times over the years, she came across something that would challenge everything she believed she knew about time and space. The area was rural farmland with few landmarks, just mile markers that showed her progress westward. Patricia saw that she was getting close to mile marker 159, a detail that only occurred to her because she had to record her location every hour in her logbook. However, as she drove steadily at 65 miles per hour for what seemed like at least 10 minutes, she was shocked to see mile marker 159 approaching once more. Patricia assumed that when she passed mile marker 159 for the third time, knowing that something was seriously amiss, Patricia pulled over and checked her GPS systems. She had 3 separate units installed in her truck for redundancy, and all 3 devices indicated that she was on Interstate 70 of mile marker 159. She was traveling west at highway speed in Illinois, according to the GPS, but her position was staying the same. The devices showed that her truck was moving along the highway, but no matter how far she drove, she stayed in the same spot. Patricia attempted to call her dispatcher to report the malfunctioning navigation equipment, but her cell phone showed no signal even though she was in an area where she had always had good coverage before her CB radio was receiving. Only Patricia thought she might be having a medical emergency, such as a stroke or seizure, that was impairing her sense of time and space, so she pulled over and performed a comprehensive self-assessment, checking her vision coordination and mental clarity. At first, Patricia was completely cut off from the outside world, trapped in a single mile of highway that seemed to repeat endlessly, and even her satellite communication system was unable to establish a connection. After an hour of steady driving, she was still passing the same mile marker 159 every few minutes, and the scenery around her remained unchanged. Everything appeared normal, and she felt fully aware and oriented. Her truck systems were all operating normally, with no signs of mechanical or electrical issues. Patricia chose to keep driving and see if the issue would go away on its own. The psychological impact of the repetition was more unsettling than Patricia had expected. She started to recognize every detail of the landscape, including a red barn with a missing board, a dead tree with distinctive markings, and the same farmhouses, grove of trees, an advertising billboard for a nearby restaurant. It was as though she was traveling through a loop of highway that connected to itself, creating an endless circle with no escape. Every time she passed these landmarks, twisted branches, a rusted farm tool left in a field, they seemed to be in the same state, as if time had stopped for everything but her truck. Patricia tried a number of different ways to get out of the loop, including trying to get off the highway, but finding that every off-ramp led to roads that curved back to the same mile marker, 159. She also tried driving in reverse, but after being stuck in the loop for several hours, Patricia noticed minor changes in her cargo. The temperature monitoring system was displaying fluctuations that shouldn't have happened, and she even tried driving across the median to go in the opposite direction, but she was still traveling westbound toward mile marker 159, the highway. Behind her was exactly the same as the highway ahead. An endless repetition of the same mile of asphalt have been feasible given the steady climate control settings, but what was more unsettling was the sound emanating from the cargo area, a low humming noise that seemed to pulse in time with her truck's engine. The medical equipment was still working, but it was acting differently than usual. Patricia looked into the cargo bay and found that the crates holding the medical equipment were glowing with a faint blue light that pulsed in the air. As Patricia watched, the glow seemed to be getting brighter and the pulsing more rapid. She realized that her situation might be related to the experimental equipment she was hauling. The pharmaceutical company had been purposefully vague about the exact nature of the medical devices, referring to them only as diagnostic equipment in the shipping documents, which had made no mention of any luminescent properties. The glow had the same rhythm as the humming sound. Patricia attempted to contact the pharmaceutical company using the emergency number they provided, but her communication systems remained completely non-functional. She was caught in a time loop with cargo that was reportedly malfunctioning in ways that defied conventional understanding of medical equipment. However, the shipping documents, complex loading procedures, and extreme security measures suggested that the cargo was far more significant than routine medical supplies. As the hours went by, Patricia started to wonder if time had any significance in her current circumstances. The psychological toll of the constant repetition started to take its toll, and she found herself developing an obsessive attention to detail, memorizing every detail of the crates. The pulsing glow from the crates was now bright enough to illuminate the entire interior of her trailer, and the humming sound had changed to a steady vibration that she could feel through the truck's frame. By repeating the landscape and timing the precise intervals between landmarks, she found that, regardless of her speed, it took exactly 4 minutes and 37 seconds to go from mile marker 159 back to mile marker 159. Patricia also started to notice that, despite driving for what seemed like 12 hours, she wasn't aging or growing tired in the typical way. Instead, she felt as alert and energized as when she had started. The most unsettling aspect of Patricia's experience was realizing that she might not be alone in the loop. She started to notice shadows in her peripheral vision of other cars that appeared to be following the same path but vanished. Her fuel gauge stayed at 3/4 full no matter how long she drove, and even her truck's odometer had stopped moving forward and was frozen at the exact reading it had shown when she first entered the loop. In addition to hearing voices on her CB radio when she attempted to look at them directly, she also began to hear faint transmissions from other drivers who appeared to be going through similar things. One voice in particular started to appear frequently on Channel 19, belonging to a trucker named Bobby, who claimed to have been stuck in his own loop for what he estimated to be several years. Bobby explained that he had been transporting similar experimental equipment when he became. Bobby claimed that dozens of drivers nationwide were caught in similar loops, all transporting cargo from the same pharmaceutical company or its subsidiaries. The equipment they were transporting wasn't medical devices at all, but rather parts of an apparatus that produced a temporal distortion field that isolated individual trucks in pocket dimensions. Bobby warned Patricia that the longer she stayed in the loop, the harder it would be to get out of the experimental time manipulation technology the company was testing using unwitting truckers as test subjects. The purpose of the technology was to examine how time manipulation affected both people and machinery, and the subjects were supposed to eventually become permanently incorporated into the experimental framework. Patricia resisted Bob's fatalistic assessment and persisted in her search for a way out of the loop, trying various driving techniques, damaging the cargo to interfere with the equipment's operation, and even attempting to leave her truck and flee on foot. She had accepted his fate as a test subject in an ongoing experiment that might go on indefinitely. Patricia's discovery that the temporal distortion was linked to her truck's electrical system came about as a result of the pharmaceutical company installing monitoring equipment that was intended to communicate with her truck's computer systems, creating a feedback loop that produced a temporal field. Every action she took led back to the same mile marker, 159, and the same never-ending repetition. Disconnecting the monitoring device caused the repetition effect to start to lessen right away. As the device shut down, Patricia felt as though time was suddenly returning to normal. The surroundings appeared to be older and more worn, as though years had passed outside. While she was stuck in the loop, her GPS system returned to service and confirmed that she was, in fact, at mile marker 159. But the date display showed that 3 weeks had gone by since Patricia had first entered the temporal distortion. Patricia promptly called the authorities to report her experience, but when investigators got to the pharmaceutical company's Ohio facility, they discovered it was deserted, with no sign of the company that had employed her. All of the registration documents for the company were fake, and the medical equipment Patricia had been transporting had disappeared from her trailer. During the FBI received 17 similar reports over the previous 5 years from truckers who claimed to have been caught in temporal loops while transporting cargo for different pharmaceutical and research companies. In each case, the truckers lost several days or weeks of time, and the companies that had hired them vanished. This was the most disturbing finding. Patricia wasn't the only driver to report this kind of experience. In order to assess the impact of her experience, Patricia underwent a thorough medical and psychological evaluation without a trace. The doctors found no signs of physical or mental harm. but Patricia claimed that her perception of time had been permanently changed, and that she could now perceive anomalies and temporal distortions that were invisible to others. Patricia also learned that she could recall specifics of the loop with uncanny accuracy, as though the event had been etched in her memory. Patricia went back to driving trucks, but she now focuses on spotting and avoiding potentially hazardous cargo. She has joined an unofficial network of drivers who exchange information about dubious shipping firms and odd delivery needs. But, most importantly, she has learned to spot the warning signs of experimental cargo that could pose a threat. The FBI believes Patricia and the other impacted drivers were test subjects in a large-scale experiment involving time manipulation, but the technology involved is beyond current scientific understanding. The investigation into the pharmaceutical company and the temporal distortion technology is still ongoing, but authorities have not discovered any evidence of who was conducting the experiments or what their ultimate goal might have been. Knowing that Bobby and other drivers who claim to be caught in temporal loops still occasionally communicate with Patricia via her CB radio, the messages arrive at random times, usually late at night, while she's traveling through isolated regions. The voices constantly alert her to new shipping companies and cargo types that may be related to the experimental program, and they implore her to find a way to save them from their never-ending. Patricia's story's final unsettling detail is what happened to her truck after the incident. Although it had been kept in perfect condition prior to the temporal loop, it aged drastically during the 3 weeks she was trapped. The tires were dangerously worn down. The engine had accumulated wear equivalent to several years of normal operation, and various components showed signs of extreme age and stress. It seemed as though her truck had experienced normal time flow, while Patricia had been shielded by the temporal distortion.